While it is nice to go to the nursery and buy plants, there's nothing better than making plants for free directly from your garden. So there are a lot of ways you can take vegetative cuttings, but I am actually not the master of it. Our horticulturist, Chris, up in Vancouver, BC, is an expert at propagation. So let's head up there and she's gonna teach you everything you need to know about vegetatively propagating your plants.
Hey, it's Chris, and today I'm looking around my garden to see if there are any plants that I can clone. So if you are like me and you have some areas in the garden that are looking a little bit bare and you want to fill with some perennial plants that you already have, then vegetative propagation can be the way to go. It can also save you time and money. So if you're wondering what that term means, vegetative propagation simply means growing plants using methods that have nothing to do with growing from seed. So in today's video, I'll go over the main vegetative propagation or cloning methods that you have likely come across, but maybe haven't had a chance to research. And the last method we're gonna go over is my favorite. It is hands-off, it's easy. I can't wait to tell you more about that, so make sure to stick around for that last one. Division is probably the easiest way to multiply what you already have in the garden. So right now I am kneeling on the ground trying to see what kind of plants I can just pop out of the ground and literally rip apart and then just pop them all around the garden. To do this method, you basically need a digging fork. If you don't have something like this, just get a shovel or a spade, because what we're essentially wanting to do is just lift the entire plant up and then either use our hands or use a knife or a shovel and separate these clumps of plants into smaller sections. So the ideal time for division is actually early spring, before everything kind of wakes up and starts to grow, because what we want to avoid is damaging all of this fresh new growth. Unfortunately, a lot of my plants are starting to wake up. There's a lot of fresh tissue. It's really not the best time for division, but I did find this one clump of geranium that I think we can dig up quite safely. So what we can do here with this geranium, you'll see all of the roots down here. They are kind of easy to separate. What I want to do is just get my hand in there, or you can also grab a knife and you just kind of rip it apart. And there you go. Here is your brand new little clump of plant. Right now, you can either pot it up into a container, maybe a 1 gallon, or you can just pop it directly into the ground. Not only is division an easy way to multiply flowering plants, ground covers, edibles with a crown like rhubarb and chives, many plants benefit from being divided maybe every 2 to 4 years, depending on the plant, because you don't want them to get overcrowded and fight for nutrients, water, and sun. This next method is probably the most common one, not just for home gardeners, but for professional growers as well. So a lot of nurseries have built their entire empires on cuttings. So let's think about those beautiful leafy house plants that we love, those annual bedding plants, a lot of the culinary herbs that we grow, the mints, the rosemary, sage, and thyme, and also fruiting shrubs like figs. These are all done through cuttings. So you can actually look around your garden and have a lot of fun with this method. When it comes to timing of when to take cuttings, it really depends on the plant. So this is my goji. I prefer to take deciduous hardwood cuttings in the fall and winter when everything is dormant. That means I don't have all of this fresh tissue to worry about. It's not going to wither away after I've severed it from the plant. But right now it is spring, so I have a lot of fresh growth. If I want to take green or softwood cuttings, I can, but I have to wait until these shoots are a little bit longer. So the timing for the goji cuttings is not ideal, but thankfully we have sage right underneath the goji plant. How convenient. So this is a great plant to harvest from. It's really easy to propagate, but before I take out my pruners and start snipping away, I do want to say, whenever you take cuttings, you want to make sure you have a container or a plastic bag with, something like a paper towel moistened inside, just to keep the humidity good in there, keep everything nice and fresh and cool, because once the cutting dries out, it's basically no good. So for the sage plant, what I'm looking for are nice, healthy tips to harvest from. You don't want anything that looks kind of sad or potentially diseased. And generally for cuttings, you want something 4 to 6 inches in length. And pro tip, if you don't have a ruler or if you can't eyeball that length, if you outstretch your pointer and pinky finger, that is roughly 6 inches. But here's another pro tip when it comes to taking cuttings. Don't worry about the exact length when you're harvesting. When we go back into the greenhouse or into a controlled environment, that is when you can cut them down to size as you prepare them for the actual sticking into the media. Now, I do have to mention that although it is really exciting taking cuttings from all sorts of plants, you do have to be aware that any plants that have those funky names or anything with a trademark is likely registered. So legally, you cannot clone those plants without the permission from the plant breeder. And this is especially important if you plan on selling the plants that you grow from cuttings. Before we start processing our beautiful cuttings, it's really important that we have our station set up with all of the materials that we are going to need. So I have here my cell trays filled up with pre-moistened media. And when we talk about the media, we're looking for something that can actually physically hold the cutting while also providing some moisture and also some aeration. So what I usually do is get a seed starting mix. It's nice and fluffy and it also holds on to moisture. I also add some extra perlite because as the roots push out and form, that extra airspace will help the roots form beautifully. And if you are using rooting hormone, have those handy as well. And my biggest recommendation, whether you're using gel, liquid, or powder, is to have a container and dump a little bit of product in there. That way you get to really control how much product goes on the cutting. A little goes a long way, actually. And although it is so tempting to dip the cutting directly into the container, by having it in a separate container, you avoid adding extra moisture and debris into the product. So before we start processing everything, we want to make sure that our tools are nice, clean, and sharp because we want a nice, clean, flush cut. Now, with the cutting, what I'm looking for ideally is something with a minimum of 4 nodes. So when I mean nodes, I'm talking about these bumpy areas along the stem where the leaves and the buds emerge. Now, I know I talked about 4 to 6 inches in length for an ideal cutting, but it really depends on the plant. If I'm cutting something that was maybe a little bit stretched out in the shade, the internodes or the spacing between these bumps may be longer. So my cutting may be longer, but something grown in full sun with really tight internodes or where the spacing is a bit shorter, my cutting may only be 2.5 to 4 inches in length. So don't worry too much about the length. Just make sure that you have a minimum of 4 nodes. That would make a really good cutting. If you're wondering how to count the nodes, let's look at this catmint right here. So we would start from the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are the 4 nodes, and underneath this 4th node that I want to keep, I want to make my nice square cut just about maybe 1/8 of an inch to 1/2 centimeter underneath, just like that. The reason why we want to cut underneath the node is because this area has a higher concentration of the plant hormone auxin, and what it will do is help encourage the rooting. So now that that looks good, what I'm going to do is just clean up the foliage here. Any extra foliage will speed up the drying out of the cutting, which is not ideal. So something like that is good. If you are doing a cutting off of a plant that has really large leaves and you want to cut down on all of that leafy stuff that is trapping all that extra moisture, you can just feel free to cut the leaves in half. Don't be shy, it's going to be just fine. Now that we know how to cut these things down, I'm going to go ahead and process the rest of the sage. Now that the cuttings are all prepared and they're looking pretty uniform, I am going to dip the base into the rooting hormone. Just a light dip, dip, dip to cover that node and that cut end. And now I'm just going to stick it straight into my prepared container. And that's it. I'm not going to try to rearrange it. That's not a good thing. All I'm going to do now is water it in and put it into my propagation station. So nothing fancy, a humidity dome for the upper parts to keep them fresh, and the heat mat for bottom heating to help speed up the rooting. Now with the moisture in there, you do want to air it out maybe a couple times a day just to keep things nice and fresh. With the rooting, the time required, it really depends on the plant. It can take anywhere between a couple of weeks to maybe a month or more before you start seeing roots emerge. So if you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of work to turn a stem into a plant with roots, Why can't I just stick it in water? Well, for some plants like basil, oregano, thyme, sage, and rosemary, they belong in the mint family and they root really readily. So you can go ahead, pop those in water, and then once they root, you can stick them in the soil. But for woodier materials or for other plants that are not so vigorous with growing roots, the method that we just went over is your best bet. This next method is one that I need more practice with, and I'm talking about grafting. So with grafting, essentially what you're doing is taking different parts of different plants and you're trying to fuse them together so that they grow as one plant. Now with grafting, you do have to do your homework beforehand, because in order for this to be successful, the scion or any of the upper parts that you are trying to fuse onto a rootstock, they have to be compatible. One of the main reasons for grafting, especially when it comes to fruit trees like apples and citrus, is so that you can preserve the qualities that you like of a variety. So with apples, they don't grow true from seed. So if I take the fruit from this tree and then take the seed and plant it out, that new tree may not share a lot of the characteristics as this original tree. So by cloning or grafting from vegetative material, that's how you're going to ensure that you get the same variety in the future. So timing wise, it's ideal to do grafting when the plant is dormant, before the buds start to swell and things leaf out. Unfortunately, my plants have all started to leaf out, so it's not the ideal time, but you can also do summer grafting from July through to September, and that's when I'm probably going to try at least one of the two more common grafting methods. One really common method is called whip and tongue, and this is where you take a really sharp knife and cut these slanted cuts that are interlocking on both the scion and rootstock, and you just kind of slip them together so that they are nice and snug. And then you would take grafting tape and wrap them together, and then after a period of time they fuse successfully, and then you get your grafted plant. This other method is called chip budding. So you can go and get your knife, and instead of cutting off a section of the scion, you're going to go and get a bud off of the current year's wood, remove that carefully, and then go to the rootstock you want to use and cut a corresponding section to fit this bud. So I'm just faking it here, obviously, because this is not connected. And then you fit it in there and then wrap it with some grafting tape. After about a month or so, it should fuse. The next year from this bud, you are going to get the variety that you want to keep, and then you can go ahead and cut this part off of the rootstock. So here is my favorite method. This is layering. So it is pretty hands-off, and timing-wise, it is less fussy than the other methods that we just went over. And with layering, I like to think of it as like backwards taking stem cuttings, because with these stem cuttings, if you remember, we are taking parts off of a plant and giving it the right conditions and hoping that it puts out roots. Whereas with layering, we are trying to get this parent plant to push out roots in the sections that we want to turn into new plants first. Once the roots emerge, then we can sever the section, and then we have our new young plant. Here I have a really lovely and healthy catmint, and close to the base, a lot of these fresh bendy stems. To layer, it's super easy. You take these stems and let them touch the soil, and you just pin it down with something like a rock or a brick. What you want is consistent contact with the soil. After a few months, when you lift the plant, you will likely see a whole bunch of new roots. Here we have some oregano. I've been layering some stems, again with just the weight of a rock. Now if I lift these sections that have been in contact with the soil, we will see some roots. All I have to do now is sever this part from the mother plant, and now I have this oregano baby that is ready to use in other parts of the garden. Layering also works with slightly woody materials. So here I have a gooseberry, and it is a bit woodier. It's not fresh green growth. What I'm actually going to do is wound an area. So I'm going to flip the stem over and then just give it a light scratch where I want the stem to meet the soil, just to wound it a bit. The plant will respond this way. Now I'm going to scratch open the soil and pin this down again with just a rock. And after a few months, we should be able to see some roots emerge. After the roots emerge, I can sever this section and then I get my brand new little gooseberry plant. The reason for wounding or lightly scraping away at the outer layers is to trigger the stem tissues to produce adventitious roots at that site. So adventitious roots are ones that develop in spots on a plant where they're generally not found. So in this case, along the stems. Now I do want to say that not all plants will respond with the layering method, especially when the plant is older and woodier. And actually that's kind of true with a lot of the methods that we talked about. But if you have some perennials sitting around in the garden with these low-lying stems, why not pin them down and just experiment and see if they shoot out roots? Wouldn't that be fun to find these instant plants a few months later without having to actually put in the effort to try to grow them? So if you have some perennial plants in your garden that you love and you know that grow well in your garden, try one of these methods out and see if that can really help speed up with the filling out of your garden in a very cost-effective and fast way.
I've got a few propagations myself and actually acting as a pruning job as well down here on this dragon fruit because it's already up at the top. I don't need any of this low growth. So hopefully you learned a lot about vegetative propagation. Stay tuned on the channel, much more coming in that world. For now, I'm gonna prune my dragon fruit. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.